Back in the 1950s, one of the preeminent Israeli archaeologists, Yagil Yadin, was conducting excavations. He's the same guy, by the way, that dug at Masada, and he was very instrumental in acquiring many of the Dead Sea Scrolls for Israel. So he was one of the guys. He was the real Ron White that really made significant finds that counted. So he was digging up here at Hatzor to the northeast of us, and while he was excavating there, we didn't get to stop at that site. He found a casemate wall, a two-wall wall that you could have rooms and you could fill it in during time of war. So it was a very thick wall, a very impressive fortification, and it was attached to a special kind of a gateway he had not seen before at that time. It was it was novel. It was rather unique. It was a 6-chambered gate. In earlier times, people would just put a gate with 2 towers, one on each side, and a single door protecting the city. That's the most vulnerable part of the city. Well, this gate was rather clever because there were 4 doors, 6 chambers, kind of guard towers, if you will, with 4 doors to break through. So this was a very fortified gate. As Yadin looked at the pottery, and he'd been analyzing, trying to figure out how to date it, he noticed it was a very unique red burnish. They had red paint on it that had been shined by hand by rubbing a stick over the paint while it was still wet, over the clay actually. And we call that red burnish there. And he figured out, I won't go into it all straight how he figured it out, it dated to the 10th century. And that was interesting because the 10th century is the time of King Solomon. We're talking about the 900s. And so he became very intrigued with the possibility that this was a King Solomon gateway. Solomon talks about building Hatzor and so forth. 1 Kings chapter 9 actually mentions explicitly that when Solomon became king, the Pharaoh of Egypt tried to encroach upon, he was a new king, and the Pharaoh of Egypt tried to encroach upon his kingdom by attacking a city called Gezer, which is actually to the south of where we are right now. And apparently the battle did not go well because the king of Egypt retreats and he offers a marriage relationship to Solomon. Remember, Solomon eventually acquired a lot of political wives. And a lot of scholars have been very curious about that. Why would the Pharaoh of Egypt give his daughter to Solomon? Because Egyptian princesses were considered too special to allow a foreigner to marry. You would only marry an Egyptian princess to an Egyptian nobleman. And in fact, there's even stories where a king from Mesopotamia wanted to have an alliance with Egypt. He said, "Can I marry your daughter?" The Egyptian king says, "Nope, can't let you marry one of our daughters. You're not good enough." And the Mesopotamian king wrote back saying, "Well, just send me any Egyptian girl. My people won't know the difference." So that's the kind of attitude people had. They wanted to be allied with Egypt. And here you have the Pharaoh of Egypt offering Solomon a princess of Egypt. So he wanted the alliance, which is rather interesting. Apparently Solomon flexed his muscles and told the king of Egypt, "You cannot have Gezer. It's on the border of the former Canaanite city. It's going to belong to Israel." And so they made the alliance. So Solomon, according to the Bible, rebuilds Gezer, but 2 other cities, Megiddo, where we're standing right now, and also Hatzor, where we passed yesterday. So all 3 of these cities were rebuilt by Solomon according to the Bible. Also rebuilds Jerusalem, the text says. Okay, that's another story. You're going to see that in the next couple of days. So Yadin's digging at Hatzor, where we passed by yesterday, and he remembered that here at Megiddo, where we're standing today, back in a couple of decades earlier, the University of Chicago and other scholars, British and others, have been digging here through the years. They had this big excavation, and they had found what we see behind us, this 6-chambered gateway. And he thought, wow, what I'm finding at Hatzor with this 4-entryway, 6-chambered gate looks just about identical to what they found at Megiddo. And he came down here and checked it out, and sure enough, he found this gate was almost the same. He said both of these must be fulfilling 1 Kings chapter 9. These are the gates of King Solomon. And that made the news back in the 1950s. I was around, but I was too young to appreciate it. But anyway, it made the news. And at that time, the Americans were starting one of their first projects in Israel. This is late 50s, early 60s. G. Ernest Wright from Harvard University with some of his students, including William Deaver, who became my professor, they started a new dig at Gezer, American dig. And Yadin heard about that. And so, remembering the Bible text, he traveled down and visited with Bill Deaver and these guys actually at Gezer. I have a historic picture in my collection that Bill Deaver gave me a copy of Yagil Yadin standing there with these guys. He had brought a copy of the plan for Megiddo and what he had at Hatzor, and he knew that British guy by the name of Bliss R.A.S. McAllister. I misspoke. R.A.S. McAllister had dug a bit of Gezer way back 1904, 1907. And when Yadin looked at McAllister's plan, he saw something labeled Maccabean Castle. And that would date from, very late in the Greek period, the Hasmonean period. And as he looked at that castle, he said, wait a minute, that's half of a Solomonic six-chambered gate. The plan matches perfectly. So he went down there and told Deaver, my teacher, if you'll dig in this place, you'll find the other half of a King Solomon gateway. Well, what do you think Deaver did? Yeah. He says, I'm digging this. Somebody was asking me just on the way up here, how do you guys figure out where to dig? Well, there's lots of different things. In that case, Yadin inspired them because someone else had found part of something. And so Deaver dug there, and sure enough, a few weeks later, the other half of the six-chambered gateway came to light. And Deaver was he was excited. Now, the thing you got to know about Deaver, I studied with him, he was sort of an anti-Bible guy. He was rebellious at Harvard. Every time G. Ernest Wright would say, hey, this works with the Bible, this confirms the Bible, Deaver was always saying, no, it doesn't. You got to show me more proof. Show me the proof. Show me the proof, And I remember Deaver said one day, G. Ernest Wright came to me and he pleaded with me, don't be so negative on the Bible. There are three big American scholars in biblical archaeology, Albright, John Bright, the historian, and G. Ernest Wright. And G. Ernest Wright went to Deaver and said, you got to get right with Albright. You got to come along and accept the Bible. And so anyway, Deaver got excited when he found this, and he even allowed that I have found King Solomon's Gate, and he was very proud of that. Now, this is the rest of the story, and I'll conclude here, and we're going to go through. Years later, a guy named Israel Finkelstein, and my guides know about him, he was a maverick Israeli archaeologist, and he wanted to challenge everybody. He was sort of like a young Deaver, and he said, Bible's not really, he's not that bad, but he questioned a lot of the conclusions. And he said that the excavations at Gezer were wrong, at Hatzor were wrong, that Megiddo, they all interpreted this doesn't belong to Solomon, that Solomon was nothing more than a little king, a little chiefdom. I think he borrowed that word from me because I wrote an article about chiefdoms, and he's never given me credit for that. But anyway, he said Solomon was just a little chiefdom, and Jerusalem was just a cow town. It was a nowheresville, and the great kings of Israel were Omri and Ahab. And the Bible story is completely exaggerating and misrepresenting what really happened. And he became part of the minimalist school, that there's not that much historical accuracy in the Bible. He made a big thing. And what really got him going was, got Deaver angry. Finkelstein said, Deaver, you're nothing more than a closet fundamentalist. And Deaver had been the rebel of the previous generation. He said, you don't call me a fundamentalist. I'm not a Christian fundamentalist. So they had this big fight. And I was a doctoral student of Deaver at Arizona, and Deaver came to class yelling about Finkelstein. This guy is, very unhappy. So, but then he said, but we really need to go back to Gezer, be like Megiddo, and dig under the foundation of the six-chambered gate. I didn't really look for the red burnished pottery, so we need to go back one more time. And we all got excited. Will you go? Will you take us? Because he said he'd retired from field work. He said, no, it costs too much money. We don't have the money to go. And so I said, well, how much would it cost? He said, it'll cost $40,000. That's cheap, but that's what it would cost back at that time. So I said, well, if we can get the money, will you go? He said, you're not going to get the money. And he said, I'll tell you what, Randy, if you get $20,000, I'll get the other $20,000. We'll go dig Gezer, the Solomon Gateway, one more time and make sure the date was right. And so I didn't know if I could get $20,000, but I called the dean of my seminary at Andrews University. It was Garrett Hazel. And I told him we got a great chance to dig with William Deaver and this big controversy with Yagil Yadin and Finkelstein and everything like that. And he said, that's great. What do you need? I said, $20,000. And I thought he was going to tell me, he was going to laugh and tell me to, drop dead. But he said, let me call somebody. And I was surprised, so I hung up. He called me back 15 minutes later, and this is going to be an Adventist joke, but he said, I have $20,000 for you. One of these rich friends. It's a guy that owns cookies at Southern. We have an Adventist that has a cookie factory at Southern Adventist University, and he called in. He said, "Yeah, I'll give you $20,000 like that." He's the kind of guy who could do that. So half hour later, I called Bill Deaver at University of Arizona. I was living in Arizona, and I said, "Bill, I've got my $20,000. Where's yours?" He went, "What?" He thought this was a joke, and so he said, "Well, let me make some phone calls." He called National Geographic. He has bigger friends. They said, "Yeah, we'll give you $20,000," and so that's how we got our budget. So we dug at Gezer, and after 6 weeks, that's another story I don't have time now, maybe on the way to Jerusalem, before I have to leave you, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But we dug there, and sure enough, under the foundation, we found the pottery that was expected, confirming the date. Finkelstein came to visit us. He was not very happy. We had a big argument there, and the argument still continues in the journals today. My friend, I was supposed to get the permit for Gezer, and this is the final thing. Steve Ortiz of the Baptist Seminary has actually got the permit for Gezer, and he's continuing to dig, and he's continuing to confirm the biblical dating of the maximalist position. Wow. And so we're kind of excited. It's fun to be in the involvement of this. Now we're going to go through this gateway, and then we'll take the tour through the rest of the thing. But this is a 6-chambered gate. You're going to see the little storerooms. You know, if you break through a gate, there'll be a little welcoming committee for you. If you break through that, there's another welcoming committee, and eventually you get inside the city. The final thing I want you to notice about the gate is it's made of very nice squared, we call them ashlar stones. That's a Phoenician characteristic, which is interesting because that first starts appearing in Israel about the time of King Solomon. And if you remember from the Bible, this is another little archaeology Bible connection, when Solomon wanted to rebuild these cities, he had difficulty finding Israeli engineers that were qualified. So where did he go to get help? He went to Hiram of Tyre, and the Phoenicians came down and helped him. Apparently Hiram was a nice guy, but he wasn't real pleased because Solomon gave him kind of like 20 crummy little cities. But nevertheless, the Phoenicians helped make Israel great at that time, and eventually the Israelis or the Israelites learned this engineering technique. And so you're going to see this wonderful Phoenician ashlar masonry in the pylons of these gate systems we go through. So that's my basic story I want to share with you. So enjoy and relish the 6-chambered gate in the context of the story, and then we'll see the rest of the city as we head to the water system. Ahab did do some stuff here. We'll see his water system.